We're going to start this puppy up.
We're going to start this puppy up.
Clear, prop.
Clear, drop. And welcome back to Building the Affordaplane. This is part 50, the last one. Now, before we get into talking about the weight issue, how much it weighs, we have just a few more things to show, and then we'll get right to it. Now we have come to the point where we want to evaluate the performance of the engine. And we're going to do that using a scale. We want to see how good the engine and propeller pull, because that's ultimately the work that needs to be done by our power plant. So basically, as you'll see in this very short video, we're tying the plane to a fixed object and using this as a pull gauge and find out how many pounds of pull we're going to get. Now keep in mind, this is not real accurate. We're actually derating the pull measurement due to the fact that we have the inertia of the plane to pull. We're pulling it at an angle, but at least it gives us a good benchmark so that later we can see whether someone else's engine or propeller configured the same way is pulling harder or less. I'm pretty happy with the results. We'll see what you think. Let's take a look. So basically what you were seeing there was right around 100 pounds of pull down at the tail wheel. And that's a lot of force for getting a very light aircraft and an occupant accelerating on the ground and into the air. Obviously that force will change when flying as there's more movement through the propeller, etc. Now let's talk about our gap cover, wing gap cover between the wings. I mentioned that I was going to get a piece of Lexan, and here it is. This is a 2 by 4 foot piece that I cut in half. So here's my resulting piece, and then instead of 4 feet, I cut it down to 41 inches. So 41 inches long by 1 foot wide. And by the way, you can cut it because it is so thin with a piece of nice sheet metal shears. This is 30 thousandths thick, so that's 1/32 of an inch approximately. Very light, very flexible, but it is very strong. This is the same stuff, Lexan, that they make bulletproof glass, if you want to call it, out of. I'm just using that as a loose term, but that is the material. Very tough. Not the type that cracks. So at the front, I simply rounded off the corners, and in the center, I cut out a slot. This is wide enough for our 2-inch tube with the 1/8 inch gussets on each side. So it's like 2 1/4 inches wide by about 1 inch or so deep. And then I got 2 holes. So let me go put this on and show you what I have in mind. Basically, it's going to straddle the gap right in the center. And here's the front. The slot was for the nose. So the hole is for a tie wrap, which will go around the front spar. Simply feed it in, it'll go around. It will hold the bottom down and then through the hole, so this will be held very nicely in the front. And then, as this goes back, I'm going to use Velcro, one piece stuck to the top of the wing right at the rib, and then the other piece onto here, so that we can peel it off if we ever need to, but it will hold the back end down. And let's go look at what it looks like from the other side of the wing. And here's a look from the rear. The only difference will be I will have some Velcro on each side to hold it in place in the back here. And it goes as far as the pulley bracket, and that's where it ends. And here it is in the front with the tie wraps on. Now, we can't really say we're done unless we've gone through the entire aircraft and replaced all of the castellated nuts with nylock nuts. Now, I use these all over throughout the past 50 build parts that I've displayed on these videos, and that's because these are great for prototyping. You can take them on and off with your fingers to see if things fit, see if you got the right bolt length, etc., etc. But then, before you go flying, when you're done, replace these with our more permanent plastic inserted nylock nuts. Nylock because they have nylon inside. Let's take a look at some examples. Nearly every single bolt on this aircraft should have a nylock nut, not a castle nut. So I spent a lot of time going through and replacing all of my temporary connections. Now, where should you use a castellated nut? There's only a few spots on the plane where they should be used, and that's with moving parts. Like, for example, this one here. This should be a castellated nut. This is the one that has to do with our stick. And as you can see, the bolt is supposed to rotate. So we don't want to tighten that up with a nylock nut. That needs to be castellated. Now here's an example that can fool you. What about down here? This needs to be replaced. This is part of our aileron system. You say that's a moving part, that should be castellated. No, that needs to be converted to a nylock. Why? Because the moving part is, if I can get my finger down here, this rod end bearing. The rod end has its own bearing. That's the purpose of the bearing, to move. We want the bolt to be tight through the bearing. Let the bearing do its job. So whenever you have one of these rod end bolts, you should have a nylock nut, not castellated. Again, I use these because it was great for prototyping. See if the bolt fits. Take it apart. Do that with fingers. You can't do that with the nylock nut, so I need to replace that one for sure. Let's look at another place where it is proper to use a castellated nut with cotter pin. And here's our aileron system on the top of the wing. This is proper. Notice the rod ends have a bearing. They need a nylock nut like I have. However, the shackle that attaches our cable needs to rotate, and that needs a castellated nut. I need to finish the cotter pin in there properly. Over here, notice nylock nut. Why? Because that's a rod end bearing, and that needs to have a tight bolt. The bearing does the work. The only other spot I can think of offhand is down here, and again we have another shackle, and that needs to rotate, and I need to finish the cotter pin with a castellated nut. But nearly everything else on this plane should have a nylock nut. Here's another spot to think about. Our pulleys. Look what I have on there, a nylock nut. Why is that? My pulleys have built-in bearings. That bolt needs to be tight. The bearing does the work. Now, if you have some sort of pulley that has no bearing, then that might be a different story. I'm not sure. But your typical pulley will use a tightened bolt. Okay, some have asked how I cut the cables. Excuse me. Yeah. All right, there we go. You're good. That's doing good. No. Yeah. Some people have asked how I cut my cables so cleanly, and I just want to point out that there's many different ways to cut cables, but if you're interested in a very quick, a very fast way to do it and to make sure the ends come out just right every time, invest in a cable cutter like this. This was like $30, and we have a big helper today. Yep, you'll get hurt by that, so be careful. What's neat about this is, well, number one, let me demonstrate it. Part of the reason it cuts so well is that the nut, the hinge, is very tight, and that keeps the shearing action of the blades just right for cutting cables. Anyhow, if I take a piece like this and I want to cut it, and one squeeze, and it's cut very cleanly. This is hard to operate for me with one hand because they have the nut tight, and as I mentioned, that's part of why it cuts so well. Also, if you notice, it captures with the tips going inward so that the cable can't escape or wobble out. But anyhow, every cut is simple, fast, and perfect with the $30 cable cutter. Much faster than all the other methods we use with cutting wheels and chisels and this and that. So just an idea. We have quite a few cable cuts with the Affordaplane for sure. If you've been following us all along, it's been just about a year since we started this project, and so you've been a witness to all of these discrete, hundreds of discrete little parts all coming together and creating the aircraft behind me there. And I hope you are convinced that with these plans, this is a very doable project. Unlike a lot of things you see on the internet and YouTube, these plans did allow us, an average building capabilities, to put together these parts and create an aircraft. There was nothing super complicated, and what fascinates me is that this was all done without any welding, any special jigs that we couldn't easily throw together, just normal shop tools, just a lot of cutting and a lot of bolting together. And that's very unique in that we're not relying on some special vendor with special parts that is critical to making the thing come together. This can be duplicated by anybody around the world with simple power hand tools. So I find that was very enlightening for me. I normally put together kits where the parts are already made and it's just a matter of putting them together in the proper sequence, and sometimes some few specialty this and that. So this was a very pleasant change to see this from scratch, as we call it, from plans built, scratch built, all go together without any hassles. Now, we weighed it. Now, why is that a big deal? I had said from the beginning that one of the primary objectives here was to build this so that it came into the legal limit of less than 254 pounds, because to the letter of the law, that is the weight limit if you want to fly an ultralight without a pilot's license and without getting the aircraft inspected. And what I want to do quickly now is go around and show you what it is that's getting weighed. Basically, what I'm saying is that we're done adding any major components. Starting at the front, we have our running engine. We've broken this in so all the fluids and everything is necessary that's in there. I have removed the gas tank that we used for breaking in the engine, and I have a completely empty 5-gallon tank in there, so that is getting weighed but has no petrol in it. Our cables are all attached because they certainly do have some significant weight. Our tail is completely finished with the bracing cables, and our ailerons and the controls that go with them are all connected, ready to go. I'm sure I'm missing a nut or a cotter pin somewhere. And our push-pull tube for the elevator is all in place. We have a cart that pumps up so that we can level the aircraft, because we're going to do some weight and balance a little bit later on. Primarily, I'm interested in the weight. And what else here? We got, there's our gas can that is not getting weighed. I do not have any seat belts. Of course, seat belts are not required to make the aircraft fly. They're required as a safety mechanism in case you don't land very well, but I am missing seat belts for what it's worth. And I'm also need to remove or not have the wing gap seal in the middle because we are going to weigh from up there, but that's pretty insignificant as far as weight goes. And notice we have our very bare bones cockpit area. Some heel rests for our toes for the rudders, and that's all hooked up. And then as far as avionics, we just have our RPM and temperature gauge and another EGT temperature gauge. So very, very minimal, but that's, we don't want to push our luck. We want to keep this as light as possible for our weighing. Notice also there is no windshield. Windshield's not required for flight. Wear goggles. And looks like some string in the seat. We'll leave that there. So that's basically our aircraft, all complete, and we're going to weigh it as is now to see how we came in as far as weight. We worked nice and hard to keep everything light. We tried to follow the plans wherever possible, and of course we know that our paint is as minimal as anybody gets. 2 coats of latex house paint. Looking nice, but as light as humanly possible, and still have a reasonably covered surface for protection. So we're going to roll out our scale. Now, using our engine hoist, we have a digital strain scale up at the top, and so our goal now is to reach between the wings and grab that top fuselage horizontal member, and we're going to lift the entire plane off the ground so that with a single reading we can get the entire weight of the aircraft. Now, before doing this, we're also going to level the aircraft so that it doesn't oscillate too much. In other words, we're going to put the tail on a lift mechanism and bring the tail up to keep everything horizontal. It's not required, but this way when the entire plane lifts off the ground, everything stays at a reasonable attitude. And so we'll go ahead and do this. We need to position this at just about the center of lift, and we'll use a strap and get in there around our center tube. Now the weight came out to 5 pounds over, 259 pounds. So good news, bad news, if you want to call it that. The bad news is we missed it by 5 pounds. The good news is that's a very doable weight in that we have a very good chance of eliminating 5 pounds. As you get higher and higher numbers, in other words, if it had come in at 10 pounds or 20 pounds or 50 pounds, overweight, it exponentially becomes maybe impossible to ever recover that type of weight without a design change. But 5 pounds, that is very doable. Might take some creative work to do, but it is doable. For example, the seat. If we change the seat, we could probably save half of that. And there's other areas. And another way to look at it is, if you were not aware, there is a way to gain some extra weight to the 254 pounds. Now, I'm not a big advocate of the parachutes, but you can buy a ballistic parachute. FAA gives you an additional 24 pounds of weight limit to have a parachute on board. If your parachute comes in less than 24 pounds, you effectively get to use that weight. So a 19 or 20 pound or even 16 pound parachute will give you that excess back. So by installing a parachute like that, you can be 100% legal with our weighing at 259 pounds, no problem at all. So, like I say, I look at this as a great success. Would I have been more pleased if it came in under 254 pounds as is? Absolutely. But that's not bad. Even the EAA says it's difficult to build an ultralight at the proper weight limit. We effectively did it, if you include the parachute, and if you don't want the parachute, because they're very expensive and there's other issues with that, we can find a way to save 5 pounds off of that. It could be as simple as, if you're following me building this, then you know before you purchase all of the exact items that I purchased that you want to be on the lookout to save at least 5 pounds as you're choosing your seat and this and that, other components, the gas tank, etc. So yes, it's challenging to save any weight, but it can be done, and we were really, really close to getting that without the parachute option. So I would say we accomplished our goal of creating the ultralight. We're a little bit heavy, and we have a little bit of work to do to get that 5 pounds off, or use the parachute and say we did, mission accomplished. So enough of that. Am I going to fly this aircraft? Probably yes. Keep in mind that this video series is a product of our company, HomebuiltHELP. If you're not familiar, you should go visit HomebuiltHELP.com on the web, and note that we've been in business for almost 15 years, and what we do is make videos on how to put together aircraft kits mostly. And this was our first attempt at putting together a non-kit, a scratch build. So that's what intrigued me very much. So you will find that over on HomebuiltHELP we have a new video title for our library, and that's Building the Affordaplane. That video series for purchase will allow you to get all of the 50 parts that you see on YouTube. Of course, those are free. You don't need to buy those. And then included with that is another 30 videos of additional information, the things we didn't show, covering all the wings and a whole bunch of other stuff that we had to kind of change as we went along. So in other words, if you're actually going to build one of these, I highly suggest the very small investment in the complete video series on how to put it together. That's what HomebuiltHELP does. That's how I make my living, my sole living. I don't have another job. So that's what I do, and that's why all these videos end up over there for sale for a very modest sum. Now, when you ask about flying, keep in mind that when we build airplanes over there and put them on video, flying them is not part of it. We are not test pilots. I am a pilot. I will probably fly that, but I'm the last person that would be showing you how to fly it. I am not an instructor. I'm not a test pilot. That's not what we do at HomebuiltHELP. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not going to share videos that I make of me flying. We'll see how that goes, but but that's not connected to the build series. That would be a separate venture or whatever. I highly suggest, though, that you look on YouTube. You will see, for example, Terry Adair, who runs the Affordaplane store. He has built one of these. He has flown one of these. And if you listen carefully and watch his videos, you will learn a whole lot about flying the aircraft and his comments about his experience with doing that. I have zero time in that airplane, so there is nothing I can tell you that would be of value as far as flying it. And of course, once you do your first flight, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you adjust, calibrate, modify to make it better. And again, that's a whole nother thing. Our goal with Home Built Help videos is simply get the plane together first. Can it be done? What does it look like? What effort does it take? What materials to build it? The flying thing is a whole nother issue for minds and talents greater than mine. But stay tuned. That would be a fun aircraft to fly. Now, keep in mind, too, that I know a lot of our audience are non-pilots, and that brings up another huge challenge, right? How do you fly something if you're not really schooled officially in flying? And again, that needs to be addressed. So, in summary, this has been and will continue to be a great project, very doable. I hope I showed you that there was no task that anyone can't perform. And what a great way to build something from scratch that you can actually fly. And believe me, it is the most affordable way to fly based on all the ways that are to fly out there. And that's not just from the standpoint of the hardware and materials you have to buy, but the whole idea of not having to go through a whole entire pilot's license course, which, by the way, is close to $10,000 nowadays, and you don't have to get it registered, certified, and all of that stuff. So flying could not be any less expensive than a project like this. So as much as it costs, it's still by far the best way to go. And there's nothing better than saying you built something with your own hands, not a kit, and you have something to be very proud about if you've never done something like this before. And please go visit us on Home Built Help, and we have the complete video series to get you off the ground. So if you haven't finished your plane, you know, back to building.